We're live. Hi, welcome to episode 3 of Club Ausome Live. This week is Mental Health Awareness Week, so I wanted to increase understanding of trauma and complex PTSD and how and why this affects neurodivergent people. Some of the themes we touch on might be triggering, so please do step out if you need to, and I've shared some signposting to support in the event description as well. We won't be reliving detail of traumatic events here. I am conscious about our own psychological safety and yours. Although we can talk about our psychological scars, this isn't the time and place to be metaphorically ripping off the plaster and exposing any open wounds. I'm your host, Charlie Hart. I'm also known as Awesome Charlie. I'm an HR analyst turned professional speaker about neurodiversity, acceptance and inclusion, and I'm joined by Leanne More Human and Vijay Panchal. So, Leanne, could you introduce yourself, please, and tell us a little about yourself?
Yeah, okay. So I have to caveat this. I'm a bit nervous. This is the first time that I've done one of these events, and being in front of the camera is quite full on.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, just be yourself. It's only us. It's only us and however many people join in.
Yeah, it's crazy because I'm used to facilitating and coaching groups of 50 people, but there's something about being in front of the camera, and probably talking about what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah.
Anyway,
topic for sure.
I'm dodging the question. So, hi, I am Leanne. I am a late diagnosed neurodivergent woman and a positive psychology coach. I should probably introduce what I'm up to. So, I'm the founder of More Human, hence the intro. It's not my actual last name, but it is on my LinkedIn. So we're on a mission to close the neurodivergence gender gap in diagnosis and to widen access to support and create equal opportunity. So at the moment, we're offering 3 things. We're offering one-to-one positive psychology coaching for well-being, wellness, performance and growth, and group coaching and learning experiences. So I'm a very experienced facilitator and group coach. And I've just launched our blog, She's Opinionated. So if you're looking for science-based insights on ADHD, autism, positive psychology, or well-being, then please subscribe. It's called She's Opinionated on Substack. And the last point, I have to take a breath. I can barely get this out. Is we just announced that we're launching the very first female ADHD and autism screening service. That's super exciting.
That's what brought you into my LinkedIn feed. I think Matt Gupwell shared it. So it's obviously something that's really needed because a lot of diagnosis of neurodivergent conditions is based around the stereotypical white little boy. So there's so many barriers to diagnosis for people with other characteristics.
Yeah, it's just outrageous, and the current wait times are years long. And if you've got undiagnosed ADHD, then you're going to feel so much impatience and anger about those wait lists. And if you're autistic, you're going to go out your mind with the ambiguity and the uncertainty. But there's a deeper, darker agenda for me in doing this. So I'm a survivor of some pretty serious abuse, hence why I have complex PTSD. And ADHD and autistic women are disproportionately affected by this. Vijay, I know that you're going to share your story today, and I don't want to discredit that in any way. But from my point of view, unless we lower the age of diagnosis and we get older women to recognise it in themselves, we'll never protect the next generation from what happened to me.
That's absolutely one of the reasons I do what I do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we all feel really passionately about it. So at the moment, we're recruiting for user testers to test the beta of the service. So if you're diagnosed with ADHD and autism and you were assigned female at birth, you might identify with another gender, then I would love if you could write me. My email is Leanne, so that's L-E-A, 2 N's, E at wearemorehuman.co.uk.
We are morehuman.co.uk, is that right?
Yeah, .co.uk, not .com. So we've had a huge response so far, and I'm expecting more. Yeah, just drop me a line and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. So yeah,
Do
sorry.
this. Yeah, I've signed up for this.
Yeah, along with a few hundred other angry.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much for being here, Leanne, and for the marvellous work you're doing. And Vijay, could you introduce yourself too, please?
Sure. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Vijay. I am a neurodiverse character artist and I facilitate art well-being workshops. I have an interest in data science and I advocate for many different things due to my lived experience, which are hidden disabilities, intersectionality, and suicide prevention. So I would love the more experiences I can get, the better to raise awareness of, you know, certain topics. And yeah, that's why I'm here. And I agree with you both that for me, children are the future. And, I would like there to be less children that go through, any sort of abuse or difficulties. So that's why I'm here to represent my diverse background. So thank you, Charlie, and thank you, Leanne.
Thank you so much for being here. Vijay's a really excellent emerging public speaker and a thoroughly nice bloke. So if you have any speaking opportunities for him, please get in touch. I'll share his email address later, or you can contact him through Ausome Charlie. Now, Vijay, let me briefly share some of my experience actually first. So I went through life most of my life undiagnosed, and I have autism and ADHD, and I always struggled with a lot of things that my peers took for granted and didn't know why until I was in my 40s. So my brother was diagnosed. There's traits of autism and ADHD all over my family, but because I was reasonably academically gifted, I kind of flew under the radar. Then really struggled. I completely fell off the rails, to be honest, at university. And I do have some tales of abuse there that tie in with what Leanne was saying. But I then struggled once I grew up a little bit. I still struggled with getting on in the workplace and still with some bullying and exclusion. So I did develop complex PTSD as well. And I think it's particularly common in people who go through life being neurodivergent and not knowing why, and trying to do things in a neurotypical way and fit into a neurotypical society. But I was diagnosed autistic aged 42, and I realised not long after that I'd got complex PTSD. It was treated. I very tragically lost my son, who was also autistic, to suicide 5 years ago, and it came back basically. So it's a permanent part of my life now. And I've also then got diagnosed with ADHD really recently, actually, at the age of 48. So I was able to get those diagnoses because although I went through my GP for my autism diagnosis, there's no NHS diagnosticians in Birmingham. So I had to go private, but the NHS paid for it. And then I've got my ADHD diagnosis through the right to choose pathway. But I went for way too long without that diagnosis and feeling broken and not knowing how to self-advocate and not knowing how vulnerable I was to abuse and trauma. So that's a little bit about me. But Vijay, would you please tell us a little bit about your experience of finding out that you're neurodivergent and PTSD and anything else that ties in with that?
Sure. So my lived experience with neurodiversity and CPTSD, before I go into that, I would sort of raise a disclaimer and say, if anyone is triggered by anything I say, please seek professional help. I always signpost people. So not too long ago, I studied a course on Center of Excellence, which are a great online school, I guess you can call them. And the course I finished was a PTSD course. And in there was a quote which is just stuck in my mind for such a long time, which said, "The traumatization of a child is a betrayal of their innocence. So that's a very heavy line there, but it's, you know, it doesn't escape truth. So from my intersectional lens, being a British Indian, I went through a lot of things that I thought were normal, but simply weren't. I would say my background, my culture is beautiful, but there's many taboo topics that aren't really discussed, and there's a sort of lack, I don't like to generalize, but lack of acceptance of diversity, not in everyone, but this is what my experience has been anyway, amongst my community and, you know, communities that I've been in touch with, within the Asian sort of network of communities. So I've grown up navigating two worlds, so to speak, being British Indian. So my earliest traumas were from the age of, you know, 0 to 5. I got a lot of love, but I also had a lot of abuse at the hand of my carers, whether they were teachers or, you know, family members, unfortunately. The passing of my grandfather when I was 4 or 5 years old, it's something I've got closure over, so I can speak about it. But in the Hindu culture, you know, there's funeral rituals, and one of this includes the body of the deceased coming to the home for ritual purposes. So unfortunately, me being one of the smaller kids, there's four or five of us in terms of children, I got the short straw, and so I was old enough to see inside my grandfather's casket, but not old enough to understand what was going on. So I had a short straw in a sense. So, you know, that's from 0 to 5. But going on, I've you know, dealt with a lot of domestic abuse situations, narcissistic personalities, even psychopathic personalities, and so, you know, I've been parentified early. There's been codependency. I've seen, you know, family members who are codependent, you know, and even narcissistic, etc. So, and this is in the, you know, the extended family, etc. But this is, I believe, this is contribute towards I have many different chronic ailments which are invisible, and I think when your body is under sort of chronic stress, you know, these things don't help. So from a neurodiverse point of view, back in the 80s, there wasn't much support for someone neurodiverse. You know, I was overwhelmed, I was masking, I was struggling to express myself. And these are the things I'm learning now that were happening to me back then, you know. So I drew and I created. Before that was play, but that, you know, eventually became my therapy, my language, you know, my freedom. And I saw that it was a common problem in society growing up, and so I helped other people. And following that, there was all sorts of discrimination, from bullying, racism, domestic abuse, discrimination in employment. And, you know, the final point I'd say with my lived experience is that I've dealt with people struggling with suicide from early on, you know, very early in my life. I've just sort of come to the realization of this recently because I've met some strangers who were struggling with suicidal ideation who were supporting. But a friend of mine within the culture passed away, and I'm still not sure what happened to him, to be honest. So that's my lived experience with CPTSD and neurodiversity, and I'm speaking out to, you know, raise awareness. So thank you, Charlie.
Yeah, that's a lot, isn't it? And what has your experience been of treatment and recovery?
Thank you, Charlie. By the way of treatment, I would say I have many late diagnoses. My GP is great, but it's hard. It's been hard to find support through the conventional medical system. I'm still on the waiting list for ADHD diagnoses through NHS, but I've had to go private, which is very expensive. It's something I'm struggling with right now, to be honest with you. But I have a great team of people behind me. Some, just to name drop, which I'm sure you're aware of, is Iqbal Mohiuddin, who is, you know, a psychiatrist. I am psychiatry, based in Luton. He's just amazing. Amanda Wells, traumatology. She's based in Watford, and she's the traumatologist I see. And I mention them because they've, you know, they're the ones that have helped me to sort of gain closure and, you know, work on things to help me, you know, recover. And recovery is a slow process for me, mentioning recovery and treatment, because I'm still in my trauma. And there's many things surrounding the area where I live, where I'm triggered and re-traumatized. So I work really hard every day, and I just make sure I ask for help. Professional support is the first port of call, and then I can deploy my strategies. So that's
fantastic.
My section on treatment and recovery, and I hope it helps whoever's listening.
I've met you a few times, and one of the things I really like about you is how honest you are. If I ask you how you are, there's no bullshit there. You just tell it like it is. Okay.
Well, just
and,
if I may, it's because my name means victory through truth. So I can't. I'm not saying I'm perfect, but I try my best, to be honest. So thank you for this opportunity, Charlie.
You're welcome. Leanne, what has been your experience of being diagnosed with ADHD, autism, and PTSD?
Okay, well, maybe we should ask that in the same order for women.
Yes. Yes.
The reality is you're going to clock up a bunch of mental illness diagnoses before you get anywhere near an ADHD or autism diagnosis as a woman.
Oh yeah, I was referred for borderline personality disorder by my GP. That's the reason I ended up with a private diagnostician saying, "Oh no, you're just autistic."
Yeah,
I'm glad you knew what she was talking about.
So much gender bias in diagnosis, and I think that's the truth. For women, we are misdiagnosed, and we're later diagnosed than men, and we experience much higher levels of co-occurring mental illness, which causes what's known as diagnostic overshadowing. So that, together with gender bias and healthcare diagnosis, because this affects all women, not just neurodivergent women, where you're more likely to be diagnosed with mental illness than a physical illness or anything's going on with your brain, is leading to underdiagnosis. And it's pretty tragic, right? Because if you don't get help early enough, then all of this abuse is going to be hidden. You're going to have all of these social struggles, work struggles, and I think the outcomes for unmedicated ADHD are pretty catastrophic.
I've had such a history of chronic overwhelm and low self-esteem and recurring treatment-resistant depression, not to mention abuse when I was younger, but it was like the key to self-compassion, really understanding that I'm a different neurotype. Could have done with not being in my 40s when I found that out.
Yeah, so you were 42? I was 36 when I was diagnosed. And I was speaking with my psychiatrist last week, and I was joking with them. I was just like, autistics really love collecting things. And I like collecting psychiatric diagnoses. They all just smiled at me. And I was like, let's go through my lifetime list. And I was like, right, treatment-resistant depression, anxiety, PTSD, complex PTSD, an eating disorder, anorexia. Also have the symptoms of orthorexia. So that's a really fun one where you have an unhealthy obsession with healthy eating or obsessive exercise. Got that, tick. And I'm currently pursuing a PMDD diagnosis. So that's premenstrual dysphoric disorder. So it affects a lot of ADHD and autistic women. And you've got those hormonal struggles as well on top of everything else. And then on top of that, I've got a bunch of neurodevelopmental and neurological conditions. Like, my brain is magical. I've got ADHD, I've got autism, I've got vertigo, tinnitus, migraines, syncope, fainting. What else? I've got a really special one, visual snow. So that's when you see static in on a television. Yeah. I was like,
one on me. Yeah.
I was like, didn't know the success. Visual snow syndrome. Look at that. And I have non-epileptic seizures as well. So yeah, I'm a psychiatrist's dream, in short. Hence why I like collecting these diagnoses. But I was refuted for borderline personality disorder, OCD, schizophrenia, and bipolar. I was pretty convinced I had OCD at one point, and I was a bit gutted when they didn't give me that diagnosis. It's like one less for the collection, until I learned that they're the top 4 misdiagnoses for female ADHD and autism. And I was like, well,
I had bipolar. That 15 years where I kept getting depression again and again and again, whatever I did, whatever demons I fought, whatever drugs I took, you know, I was convinced it was bipolar. But now that I know about autistic burnout and ADHD hyperfocus and things, I'm not so sure.
Yeah, and like, I mean, if you look at the bias in diagnosis, it's basically telling us, yeah, boys are born different, like they have a neurodevelopment condition. 3 times as many men, are diagnosed with neurodevelopment conditions across the board. So that like includes Tourette's, dyspraxia, dyslexia, the whole shebang is overdiagnosed in men and underdiagnosed in women, whereas twice as many women are diagnosed with mental illness.
We're mental and hysterical and all that lovely stuff.
Yeah, and when you look at these 4 misdiagnoses, all of them include symptoms of psychosis.
Yeah.
And we're basically saying, you women are crazy bitches, and they're different.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I kind of laugh about it, and I'm glad that I wasn't misdiagnosed. I had a pretty massive breakdown 2.5 years ago, and I paid for a private psychiatrist to assess me. Really amazing psychiatrist, nice Kiwi man, very intelligent, very thorough. And at the time, I was really paranoid that I had borderline personality disorder because I'd been in an abusive relationship, I'd been gaslighted, I was responding as you would do after an abusive relationship. I had very serious complex PTSD. And I was very sick, and I wanted a second opinion because I'd pressed my clinical psychologist about it, and she's like, no, you don't have BPD, you have complex PTSD. And I got this second assessment because I couldn't function at all because I'd had a huge burnout and breakdown, and I was losing skills and like completely exhausted and like just overwhelmed and just breaking down. And
functioning just stops functioning, doesn't it, in that kind of situation?
Oh my good God. Yeah, and sorry to use the name in vain. But I always make a full pass. But anyway, when a psychiatrist assessed me, he was just like, Leanne, you do not have borderline personality disorder. You don't have a personality disorder. This has been caused by relational abuse and trauma. I'm diagnosing you with complex PTSD. Mm-hmm. And he added the caveat that you attract vindictive men. And I think that was really...
You're not broken, it's your taste in men, yeah.
Yeah. But that's the thing, though, because they're attracted to me. Hyper empathy. Yeah, and interestingly, I think that was really helpful for me because if I'd been given a BPD diagnosis tends to like put the blame on the person. If you look through that diagnostic criteria, very much I attribute causation to fixed personality traits and the person, which means that you aren't empowered to change things, that you feel responsible for the abuse. And like, it's just classic victim blaming in the form of a psychiatric diagnosis, let's be honest. Whereas a complex PTSD diagnosis correctly attributes causation to relational abuse and gives the survivor a sense that they can do something about this and they can recover. You've got a mental illness, like you do not have a fixed personality disorder. And so I was really grateful to him that he did diagnose me with complex PTSD and make certain that I was really clear, nope, you've been gaslighted, you're not crazy. You've got complex PTSD, and here's why. But what was interesting about it was he knew I was autistic, but he didn't tell me. And it wasn't until I was sitting in self-reflective practice and supervision, I was going through a lot of therapy at the time. You have to, if you're a positive psychology coach and you're accredited. I was like, there's something really different about me. And there was kind of like 3 big red flags. One of them was my level of empathy. I'm highly affected by other people's distress, emotions, and like people just gravitate towards me to share their pain and for me to hold space. And I've got endless empathy. I really have. And then the second one was when I'm listening, I tend to like really hyper focus on the conversation, and then I'll completely lose track of time because I'll be listening so intently to you and your story. And then the third one was my intelligence. Like I've got a very high IQ, and it was pointing towards either autism or schizophrenia. And I was just like, oh my God, like, could autism look different in females? And I started to look around me, and I was just like, all the men in my family have got ADHD or autism, and all the men in my life are fit that profile as well. And I looked at myself and I was like, I've got autistic traits.
Yeah.
And like, I think knowing, when I looked into the gender differences and knowing that it presents quite differently in women, I was able to go back, and it was quite funny actually, because I wrote the psychiatrist, and I was like, hi. So I think you've missed something. Classic autism, correcting a psychiatrist and spotting it nurse. I'm 90% sure I'm autistic and ADHD and dyspraxic. I've made you a spreadsheet. I've categorised it with all my symptoms.
Awesome.
Could you please review your diagnosis and let me know what you think? And
I feel left out now. I haven't got a spreadsheet of traits. I've got a PowerPoint of traumas, but
yeah, it was hilarious. And his reply to me was classic. He was like, "Yes, Leanne." It's like, direct psychiatrist. You do have autistic traits.
he didn't say well duh then. Yeah.
He was like, highly intelligent and excellent at spotting patterns and painfully honest. And then he elaborated that autistics experience really high levels of victimization and abuse throughout their life. And at that point, the penny dropped for me. And I was like, oh my goodness, like I have been attracting this my whole life because I had undiagnosed ADHD and autism. Yeah. And so I think for me, if we can widen awareness about what it looks like in females, then we've got an opportunity to stop that happening to the next generation.
Definitely.
To flag them as high risk.
If I could go back in time and talk to my younger self, I would definitely say you're vulnerable to abuse and predators. You will be attracted to you like moths to a flame.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny you bring that up because there's actually a paper called Moth to a Flame, and it's about the attraction between narcissists and narcissistic abuse and women with hyper empathetic traits, which is female autism. And these women developing complex PTSD as a result. And that link hasn't been made. And so you are attracting them like a moth to a flame. Like they have no empathy and you've got an abundance of it. Yeah. So yeah, it kind of changed my life and what I wanted to focus on. And here we are. Yeah.
So what's been your experience of treatment and recovery?
Well, I've seen a lot of psychiatrists in my life and spent a lot of money on them because I collecting diagnoses, right? But I also have had a lot of therapy and I've tried a lot of different things because I've had such bad complex PTSD. And I think for me, what worked best was EMDR treatment. And I think it works. It may very well work better for neurodivergent humans because you don't necessarily have to talk, and it's a real visual way of processing the trauma. And so what they do is they put you into the equivalent of an REM state on the theory that when you're traumatized, you won't process the trauma during that REM state in your sleep. And they might get you to follow their finger, or they might give you buzzers, and they'll help you process it and give you therapy. And that was amazing. It really did help me. So yeah, EMDR, and then yoga and mindfulness.
Yeah.
Getting into your body and out your head.
I was in the waiting list for EMDR on the NHS, but there was some email or letter that I didn't respond to, and I fell right out of the waiting list. So this is how they massage the figures, isn't it? But I do yoga as well. But,
yeah. Well, I don't know about you, but like I find it when I'm really distressed with PTSD, my physical distress goes through the roof, and I end up with a lot of pain. And if I can release it, then I'll feel a lot better. But I have to be at a certain level that I can engage with that, because it can tip into overwhelm.
I can't do yoga if my brain is like scrambled eggs. It's like that's what I can do when I'm maintaining mental health rather than to get out of crisis. To get out of crisis, I'm usually walking.
Yeah.
I can walk for hours and hours and hours. The left, right, of my feet moving forwards and the ever-changing scenery.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm trained as a yoga teacher and in mindfulness. And I think like you should always caveat this with anybody that's like traumatized. Like if you engage with trying to release trauma out of the body, it can cause neurogenic tremors, which can look like a seizure as it tries to come out of the body. And so it's something to be mindful of. And obviously, if you're autistic, that can cause you to go in massive overwhelm. And so I think going gently and doing what your body will allow, and not pushing it too far is really important. Do whatever is there for you. And then with mindfulness, a lot of people preach mindfulness, not aware that if someone has a condition that is associated with psychosis, you can actually trigger psychosis with it. So if someone's got schizophrenia, bipolar, or like psychotic depression, or they're extremely distressed, you could actually do a lot of damage by suggesting mindfulness.
That's really good to know. I've been recommended it a few times, and I can't even leave my worries and plans and schemes at the door when I go to yoga. I immediately start thinking I must blog about how hard this is later.
Yeah.
That's a really good insight.
Yeah.
Would you be able to share some myths and misconceptions and incorrect assumptions about PTSD that you'd like to clear up?
You're all it if I do that, Charlie.
Just a couple, I'm just conscious of time.
Yeah, maybe I'll just like try and pick a couple. Okay, PTSD misconceptions. Okay, well, firstly, PTSD. Male soldiers only get PTSD, right?
Oh yeah.
Incorrect. Actually, mental illness in general affects twice as many women. It's depressing being a woman. So we're twice as likely to get depression, twice as likely to get anxiety, twice as likely to experience PTSD, twice as likely to experience complex PTSD, and the sticker, 3 times more likely to be labelled with borderline personality disorder. And BPD, as it's abbreviated, is the #1 misdiagnosis for complex PTSD. And so the stats surrounding how many women have complex PTSD are probably way higher than they actually are. And then if we consider that a lot of women who are traumatized don't necessarily have access to support and to mental health care and even get a diagnosis, then it'll be grossly underestimated. So that would be the first thing, is that PTSD affects more women actually than it does men because of gendered violence, largely. And building on that, there's 2 types of PTSD. So there's PTSD, which is caused by a singular traumatic incident, like regular PTSD, which will cause a trauma response. And then there's complex PTSD. So complex PTSD is caused by prolonged trauma or relational abuse, typically relational abuse, or lots of traumas or mini traumas, or re-victimization. And if you're traumatized and victimized earlier in the lifespan, then you're highly likely to be re-victimized as an adult. It's one of the most tragic things about having complex PTSD, as you will attract it again. And I think that's important to know, because a lot of people will point the finger at those that are being victimized, like, you're attracted to this, like, you need to leave that relationship.
Yeah.
Like,
I was joking when I said that earlier, by the way. You're not the problem. Yeah.
oh, I know. I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just classic victim blaming. When actually abusive people are attracted to vulnerability. That is the truth. So that would be like the first myth. And then the second myth that I think needs cleared up is surrounding the misdiagnosis of BPD and complex PTSD and why that's happening. So complex PTSD is actually a relatively new diagnosis. It wasn't a diagnosis in officially and clinically available until 2018, when it was put in the ICD-11. And so that's a diagnostic manual that clinicians can use to diagnose mental health conditions. And it's still not in the DSM-5, the psychiatry Bible. It doesn't exist.
My diagnosis just says PTSD, even though I know it's complex PTSD, because it's from the snowball effect of a series of different traumas over time.
Yeah, or they might diagnose you with like PTSD with dissociative features, which is complex PTSD. But yeah, like, so there's like really low clinician awareness about complex PTSD, and a lot of women who, and I say women because 3 times as many women get diagnosed with BPD, and then if you're trans, you're 4 times as likely to get diagnosed with it, just to add to that. There's a leading trauma expert. I'm not sure if you've read his book. It's called The Body Holds the Score.
Oh,
It's,
yeah.
Yeah, you read it? Yeah.
Yeah. Gabor, is it Gabor Mate, that one?
It's Bessel van der Kolk. So he's
one of these I've taken with a pinch of salt, because it seems to be indicating that adult ADHD is actually just a lot of trauma.
Yeah. I don't remember reading that. If
I might be thinking of a different one.
Maybe you're thinking about Scattered Minds by Gaber Mate.
Yes. Yeah.
No, The Body Holds the Score is about the embodiment of trauma. He's a psychiatrist. He specializes in trauma. But Bessel van der Kolk has argued that pretty much every human that is diagnosed with BPD should be re-diagnosed with complex PTSD, because they've actually experienced relational trauma and they're having a trauma response, and they do not have a personality disorder. I
was thinking of Gabor Mate.
Yeah, and the research supports that. The research says that half of BPD humans recover within 5 years and do not meet clinical cutoff for a diagnosis anymore. And so it's a trauma response. It's temporary. It's not a fixed, pervasive personality disorder. And so I think, I feel a lot of injustice for those that have been misdiagnosed with BPD and actually have complex PTSD, and or have underlying ADHD and autism, which many do.
I was going to say I've read up the diagnostic criteria for borderline personality disorder and thought, what here can't be explained by autism and trauma?
No.
I'll just move on to Vijay, because I'm conscious of time. Vijay, are there myths about PTSD that you would like to bust?
There's one, yes, but it overlaps with what you're talking about. I just feel it's quite a blessing to be in the presence of both of you. I'm sorry that you've gone through what you've gone through, but in a sense, I'm glad that we have this interaction right now and we can raise this awareness, because in my experience, I've also seen what you just spoke about, Leanne, which is misdiagnoses amongst women. And I often get a lot of women predominantly contacting me asking about ADHD diagnosis and what to do. And so, I signpost them and, give as much information as possible. So, but in terms of myth busting, a myth I've heard is that CPTSD does not damage the brain. Now, this is false because it does damage the brain. It changes functions in the prefrontal cortex, and which affects executive decision making and emotional dysregulation and things like that. So, I mean, I'm not a scientist, but that's my disclaimer there. But obviously, go and check it out. But I know from my lived experience that, you know, if I combine neurodiversity with what I've just said, where I'm already overwhelmed by default, and then the other elements I struggle with, which I'll just mention briefly: mast cell activation syndrome, dysautonomia, hypermobility. Now, hypermobility has a link, is comorbid with ADHD. But the EDS Society have various lectures on this, you know. So the point I'm making here, I guess, is that if you have all these, if you're chronically stressed and you're traumatized and you're neurodiverse, you know, and you have mental health issues and you have physiological issues, this combination makes life quite challenging. And then on top of that, someone might mask. So I'm talking about myself, I guess, but my body is on constant alert. You know, I'm still, as I said, in my trauma. And I think this myth, you know, along with what Leanne said about, you know, only soldiers experience trauma, etc., and the sort of lack of recognition of CPTSD as opposed to PTSD. I think these are all important things, you know, to raise awareness about what it is that we're struggling with, and, you know, how to help each other. But I'd love to talk to Leanne more, you know, individually about everything she said, because I could relate so much to what you were talking about, Leanne.
Yeah.
Awesome. And yeah, I mean, for me, the biggest one I would like to bust is that people think that when you've got PTSD, you're just carrying on life as normal like any other person, and that it only affects you if you hit a psychological trigger. Because to me, that's absolute nonsense, because if I do have a psychological trigger, then it's followed by a period where I'm not functioning as my normal self, because I'm having to put myself back together and recover and bounce back. And it affects my resilience as well. So that bouncing back is going to take me longer. And it has an effect on me all the time in a fluctuating way, but not just when I hit a trigger. So it can, if I'm in a bit of a bad place with complex PTSD, it can mean that I'm constantly meerkatting. So this is an analogy for being hypervigilant. So I'm constantly looking for danger.
Yeah.
To the extent where my surviving teenage child has a long lie-in, and I go running into a bedroom at midday because I haven't seen her and I think that she might not be with us anymore. And also at work and at times in the neurodiversity advocacy community, people have been trying to do the right thing, but doing it not in a way that I feel safe around. And I've seen them as a danger and a threat. And then I've had to apologise sometime later and say, that's my PTSD hypervigilance. I'm afraid it wasn't entirely rational. I don't think you're a bad and dangerous person at all. It's just how I sometimes react to things. Yeah. So it isn't just about our triggers. It's way more than that. Yeah. Now, onto allyship. So this is about how other people can show us empathy and compassion and support us. Leanne, could you share some advice about how others could show more empathy and compassion to those living with complex PTSD?
Well, I'll maybe start with us, just to
also have compassion. Yeah,
just address this question in a way you might not expect. Well, firstly, you have to look at the causation of complex PTSD when considering this. So, complex PTSD is caused prolonged trauma, repeated trauma, typically relational trauma. And when a person experiences that, it will involve emotional abuse, and then it might involve physical abuse, it might involve sexual abuse, it might involve financial abuse, and it goes on, right? But it always starts with emotional abuse. And generally, the perpetrators of that will have one of two personality disorders. They'll have narcissistic personality disorder, or antisocial personality disorder. And one thing's common between these, and that is a lack of empathy, regret, remorse, and complete disregard for the distress that they've caused you and the pain that they've caused you. And so if you've gone through that kind of abuse and it's been chronic and you spent your whole life surrounded by those types of personalities, you learn one thing. You learn that you're not worthy of empathy and compassion because you're constantly surrounded by a lack of it. And a response to that can be that you internalize that and start to show yourself less empathy and compassion. And that is really harmful to your mental health. And so I think starting with yourself and practicing self-empathy and self-compassion is really important, and recognizing that you've been through this horrendous trauma that has caused mental illness, that it's not your fault, that you're not your mental illness, it's separate to you, by the way, like you will recover. And being kind to yourself, being compassionate to yourself and practicing self-care, like put blame squarely where it belongs, it's not with you, and recognize that you are worthy of love, care and support, and asking the right people for that is the trick. Like, not the people that did it to you. Ask for people that do have empathy and compassion, and for professionals that do have the skills in dealing with it. So I'm talking about psychologists, psychiatrists, and other mental health support workers. So yeah, that would be my short answer to your question. No, it wasn't directly.
Yeah, I'm tearing up a bit here. Yeah. I had some psychoanalytical psychotherapy back in 2007 after hitting a rock bottom, before I knew about autism and PTSD and things. But
Yeah.
I felt like a bad person. So she had to rebuild my self-esteem and make me feel like I wasn't a bad person. And it's, how did I get into my 30s and think that? It's certainly not how I was brought up in my childhood, but it's,
Yeah.
it's very difficult to unpick that and put it right, isn't it? It's a
Yeah,
huge task.
it's difficult. Like, but taking that finger that's pointed at you and then pointing it back them.
Yeah.
I think that's empowering, and recognizing it's not you, it's not your fault. You didn't bring this on yourself. And I think for me, learning to argue with that has really helped me heal. And I'd urge anyone that's feeling like they're worthless or unworthy of support or they're the problem to try and challenge that thinking, that you are worthy of support and help, and that you're not the problem.
Thank you. Vijay, do you have anything to add about how people can be more compassionate and supportive about complex PTSD?
Well, I think Leanne read my mind, because that's what I wrote down, to mention is empathy, for compassion, support. So how to support and be compassionate towards people with CPTSD and neurodiversity is, I think, empathy, understanding, respect, kindness, patience, presence, reassurance, calm, all these sort of interpersonal skills that, as Leanne said, if one is narcissistic, they don't understand, empathy. But these things I find, for me personally, that they help a lot. And I can again relate to being surrounded by many people that are not empathic. And I think if you can put yourself in someone else's shoes, then you may be able to understand that, hold on a minute, they might not be able to attend this event today, or they're struggling to express themselves, because they're overwhelmed or they're being triggered, they need a quiet space, so I'm often deploying that, how I'm treating others how I'd like to be treated. So that's my answer to that one.
Yes, thank you. And Vijay, do you have any self-care advice and coping strategies that you use that could potentially help other neurodivergent people with complex trauma and PTSD?
Yeah, so what I do is I always signpost someone who's asking me for support, and the main thing I say is, please get professional support, The traumatologies work for me, as Leanne said, with EMDR. That has been a breakthrough for me. And I've studied and attended various types of counseling over the years. So, those professional support is key. And if you're in crisis, then seek help from places like Samaritan or 111. If it's suicidal ideation, then, it's definitely the emergency service you want to call. Apart from that, I would say supportive networks have helped me, friends, family, support groups, charities. There's many kind people out there. And by way of management strategies, I pray a lot, I meditate, I create things, I move, I distract myself, I allow myself that, I rest, I take breaks. So there's a whole bunch of things that one can do, cooking. Someone, if they find that creative, they can cook, they can garden, but
one of
yeah,
mine
those
cooking,
things work for me.
especially if it involves chopping up vegetables into tiny pieces. Make of that what you will.
Yeah, colorful vegetables, color. I think color has been important for me. But those two things: professional support, supportive network, management strategies. Those 3 points I would, say are very important. But yeah, don't try and not telling anyone what to do, but don't take it on all yourself.
Yeah.
You need help. You all need help. We didn't all get to this point in our lives by ourselves. We're here right now supporting each other with this and everyone that's viewing. So that's my answer to that one.
We need the scaffolding. We need to climb it as well. We can't get there alone. And that's one of the things that I love about the neurodiversity online community, because I've found people that they've gone through similar things to me, and I don't feel so alone, and we can support each other mutually. Leanne, have you got anything to add about self-care strategies and tips?
Yeah, of course. Well, I mean, I think just to reinforce what Vijay said, I think first and foremost, if you're suffering from complex PTSD, BPD, or traumatized, then good therapy. Like, find a really good clinical psychologist that understands third wave psychology techniques. So I'm talking DBT, EMDR, acceptance, commitment therapy, parts work, somatic therapies. They all work really well with complex PTSD and are very effective and can give you some relief. And then you can add positive psychology coaching on top of that to help you move forward and build your well-being up and your wellness and help you flourish and grow. But I think it's really important to caveat this, that coaching is not a substitute for good therapy. And any coach that takes you on, if you're in that position and doesn't refer you on, is ethically out of stance. And so if you do come to me looking for support with trauma, I'm going to be saying, where's your therapist? That's not what I do. But I can give you a positive psychology strategy today that you can use today, right away. It's called real-time resilience. And it's my go-to strategy when I go into a dark place and my head starts spiraling and maybe I'm berating myself, blaming myself, ruminating. We've all been there, right? And so I think this strategy is really effective for neurodivergent humans because it involves think aloud. And so it actually builds on one of our strengths. So if you're ADHD, then you're very likely to be hyper talkative and like talking. And if you're autistic, then you probably like talking to yourself and scripting conversations. I know about this because I do it all the time. So essentially how it works is you break thought patterns by speaking out loud and talking over the negative critic that's in your head and is beating you up. And you use 3 sentence starters. So the first one is, that's not true, because. The second one is a more positive way to look at this as. And the third one is plans, actions. What am I going to do about this? So the way this works for me is I'll catch myself when I go into a negative spiral, and I'll use my hands. I actually find using action as well as my voice helps. And I'll be like, stop.
Yeah, great.
That's not true because. And that's also not true because. And that's not true either. Leanne? and I'll have a word with myself until I've convinced myself that these thoughts are not true. And then I'll move on to the second step, and I'll be like, a more positive way to look at this is, and at this point, I might practice gratitude and try to be grateful for some of the things I've gained as part of the experience. Focus on what I've learned from what I've gone through and what I'm dealing with. And then I also might start to look at alternative explanations for what's going on right now. And so a classic one, if you've got autism or ADHD, is rejection sensitivity. So say like when you're in a group chat and all of a sudden someone leaves, or you're sent an email and you get a read receipt, but they don't email you back. And the immediate response of someone who's got RSD with ADHD and autism is, it's my fault, I've done something wrong, like I'm an awful human. And then you just start like going boom like this. and it's just like, okay, what's an alternative explanation for this? Maybe like they're unwell, or maybe they need time to think about this, or maybe they've got caught up and forgotten about it because they're also ADHD. And so starting to look at alternative explanations for your thinking also helps. And then the third part, plans. So at this point, you should be feeling a lot more positive and able to come up with ideas, whereas you probably felt pretty stuck when you were in that dark place. And you just brainstorm a bunch of ideas that you could do. ADHDers are brilliant at this because you're really creative. But what ADHDers struggle with is picking one and doing it. And so the trick here is to like pick one thing that you can do now or within the next 24 hours and to do it within the next 24 hours. Because the reality is when we've got a problem and it's mushrooming in our head and we're not doing anything about it and we've not taken action, we feel terrible. But as soon as you take action, you feel great. And ADHDers are action biased. So yeah, that's probably my top tip. Yeah.
Excellent tips. Yeah. I do a lot of blogging. So if I've got some thoughts spiraling around in my head, if I commit it in writing into my WordPress blog, even if I don't publish it, it can come to a conclusion and a full stop, and then I can get on with my life. It's not foolproof, but I find it helpful. And if I'm going into a situation which I know is going to be quite triggering, like, for instance, it's my son's birthday or the anniversary of losing him, something like that, I know in advance, and I'm not hit like a curveball by that. Then I plan to do something nostalgic to remember him, remember the good times, and I can take the sting out of it then because I'm doing something nice.
Yeah.
But I mean, I've got so many self-help things I do, but they're different for different people. But going for a long walk, especially if I can see water and like reflections, bridges, ripples, things like that, sunsets, it always helps me calm myself. And I lean into art as well and animal therapy. So a lot of people seek solace in very non-judgmental animals that you can tell anything and they won't repeat it to anybody. So there's so many things.
Animals are so comforting, eh?
Yeah. Thank you both so much for sharing your expertise and experience and advice, and to our audience for joining us for this important conversation. I really hope it was insightful. Please do connect with Leanne More Human and Vijay Panchal, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks for another Club Ausome Live. And meanwhile, stay awesome, look after yourselves. I will post some signposting in the descriptions of these events. And thank you very much for being here. Thank you, Vijay, and thank you, Leanne. You've been fantastic.
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Leanne.
Yeah, thank you, Charlie, for setting this up and giving us the opportunity to speak about these things today.
You're welcome. Right, I'm going to end the stream now, so goodbye to anybody watching.